Game over, man. Game over. Johnny.
You're gonna need a big approach.
So serious.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Chasing the Gold from In Session Film. I'm Shadan. As you can see, I'm down a co-host today, but I'm joined by In Session Film contributor Andy Punter. And In Session Film has started a really exciting new venture, which is that we are doing the Chasing the Gold podcast. But in addition to that, we have writers that have divided up all the Oscar categories, and we'll be doing monthly columns sort of breaking down the race. So we thought it would be fun to try to bring as many people on to sort of talk about their columns. So Andy, I'm going to toss it to you. Tell me a little bit about yourself and what you're going to be covering for In Session Film this year.
Great, yeah, thanks. So I'm actually quite new to the In Session Film team, and I'll be covering the Best Actress race for this year's award series season and Best Editing. So I think my first column on editing went out last week, and you can keep an eye out on the site for next week for my Best Actress inaugural column, where we're going to be looking back at the 2024 race and how that shook out. So yeah, super excited to be talking about this in a bit more depth this evening.
Awesome. So this means that I'll have to get you on for an editing episode as well. So to kind of start, I wanted to ask you about your award season journey. You know, what made you passionate about award season, Best Actress in particular? Was there a movie, a year, a race? How did you end up where you are as a Best Actress nerd? How did that happen?
Yeah. I mean, I think, I love the awards circuit anyway, and particularly the Oscars. Although I'm English, and we have our own BAFTAs and everything. There's something really special about the Oscars that, as a film fan, has always kind of been a date in the diary that you kind of ring. You know, you ring that date on the calendar and you get excited about what's to come. I think there's almost something wonderfully silly about the idea of best art. Right, like there's almost something idiosyncratically odd about that. The idea of the Oscars in particular telling us something really meaningful and tangible about how Hollywood sees itself, like that to me is what makes it absolutely fascinating. And you know, the drama that follows this whole build up to the Oscars, you know, as really kind of the final word in the awards calendar in many ways. It's kind of like, you know, the Super Bowl of award ceremonies, and you know, there's all the campaigning and you get to watch as the other awards happen, and that kind of tilts the odds and things like that. So it becomes like this fascinating spectacle. It's like sport but for movies, and I love that about it. I love the politics, I love the drama, I love the pettiness, that you know, and that's the stuff that's just fascinating and loads of fun to dive into. So in terms of, there's been loads of really memorable races, and then the Best Actress category in particular, I think it's a fascinating one, because so often it sort of sits apart from some of the rest of, you know, you'll very often see there's a very close relationship between Best Picture and Director, and often Best Actor actually. You know, like that particularly shook out this year. You know, but it's very common that the best movies, or the same movies, will win for those awards. And it's very common. It's not unusual to see Best Actress kind of sit slightly apart from that. And I think that's always really interesting to see then, you know, what performances did the Academy really reward and value, and why is that? And what does it tell us about the wider industry as a whole?
And that's what we're going to be digging in today. But before we start, I wanted to kind of ask you, do you have sort of your list of actresses where you go, I'll see them in anything? Like, their name is enough to get you to turn on the movie, head to the theater. Like, what does that list look like for you?
Yeah, so when I saw this question, it sort of threw me for a loop, because it's sort of, there's so many, right? It's so hard to try and be like that prescriptive and be like, okay. So I think actresses who are working today, I think I will always turn out for Saoirse Ronan. I think anything that she's doing is worth watching. I think she's a really interesting performer. She's still very young, but I think she's in a bit of a strange spell in her career, maybe choosing some slightly different roles than she would have done 2 or 3 years ago. But I can see her having a really special like career. I think she's really, really special as a performer. I think we'll talk about her in more depth. I mean, Emma Stone has consistently been one of the most exciting actresses in Hollywood for quite a long time now. And again, her career trajectory has been fascinating to watch. So I think those of actresses who are working today, that those are two that spring to mind. But I mean, there's obviously loads. I'm trying to limit myself to Hollywood actresses as well, because before we start talking about, I will watch anything with Sandra Hüller. To be fair, like I think she's like,
she's probably the newest one. She's probably the newest one on my list. And it's funny because I went through her filmography and there were so many things that she was in where I didn't even know it was her. She's such a chameleon. And so I guess also I wanted to know, when you watch a film and you're sort of evaluating a Best Actress performance, what is it that you look for? What is it that makes a performance sort of pop for you in particular?
Oh, wow. What a question. That's really hard to, I mean, I guess in the same, it's similar to the way you would maybe look at films as a whole, I guess, is what is the story trying to tell us? You know, what is this, and how am I as an audience feeling, and how am I meant to feel, and what part is the, you know, the acting performance, like how is that bringing, you know, what role is that bringing and shaping and bringing that to life for me? You know, you get some of these performers who are just incredible chameleons who can embody emotions like so incredibly and then kind of evoke those feelings in you as an audience.
Absolutely.
And then you have some performers who are just incredibly charismatic, like you just can't take your eyes off them. You know, when they're on screen, there's just this kind of ineffable thing that they have that kind of means that they're just magical to watch. So there's that kind of charisma component. That's something, for example, that it's the difference between like Elizabeth Hurley and Jennifer Lawrence, right? Like Elizabeth Hurley, in spite of the fact that she's objectively a beautiful woman, is not a great actress, and it's sort of, there's something missing, and sort of I find on her performance on screen that there's this kind of magical ingredient that just doesn't seem to be there. Whereas Jennifer Lawrence, just charisma, like oozes charisma, and you believe that she can do anything, like, and she can do the mainstream franchise stuff, she can do the, you know, more serious drama stuff, and you know, so yeah, it's really difficult. What are you looking for in a performance? It's hard to you know when you see it, I guess.
No, that's, I mean, that's a good way to put it. So what we wanted to do today was kind of dive into some actresses that have multiple Best Actress wins and kind of dive into these wins, dive into these performances. And as you mentioned, the Oscars are hugely political. There's always sort of the behind the scenes narrative that contribute to the win. So I would love to dig into that. And the first person we had on our list was our newest multiple Best Actress winner, Emma Stone. So give me your thoughts on Miss Stone. I'm so looking forward to this.
Yeah, I mean, I think as an actress, as a career, Emma Stone's career is like been remarkable in a lot of ways, because I think her early roles were they look quite typical on paper. I think very often, you know, if you watch something like, I mean, the first thing I remember seeing her in was Easy A, which on paper looks like a conventional high school kind of comedy drama coming of age thing, but there's something, and I think it's not just her, like there's a really brilliant cast and it's a really well written film, it's really interesting, it's a really good film, but something about her performance that makes it a bit more than just this kind of set of genre conventions. I think you see the same trend in kind of almost everything that she does. You know, as she kind of progressed and started, you know, did was it Crazy Stupid Love, the Ryan Gosling rom-com? Again, it's like really smart, really clever. It's not exceptional in that. Like there's lots of really smart, really clever rom-coms, but there's this quality that she brings to it. But I think she won obviously her first Oscar in 2016 for La La Land, a film which I am the world's most passionate advocate and defender, and it's really trendy and popular to trash that movie, I think, for some reason. I just love it. Like, and I think she's the reason why I love it. Like, I think she just had I think a less capable performer who doesn't have her sense of humor, who isn't quite as down to earth. There's something that she raises. She raises an eyebrow really cleverly in the right moments, and something that kind of makes you feel as an audience like you're in on the joke, even when it's something that's very heavy. And she's doing a lot of heavy lifting dramatically. So yeah, I loved her in La La Land, which she won in 2016, and I think that was, yeah, I know that particular Oscars race was particularly memorable for La La Land and not winning the Best Picture Oscar and all the drama that surrounded that. And of course, yeah, she's added a second Oscar this year, and it seems like since she did La La Land in 2016, she's doing weirder and more wackier, crazy, like odder films, and they're better for it, I think.
This is something that I kind of wanted to dive in with you. Is like, it's interesting when the Oscar win happens, kind of what route the actresses take. And I think with Emma, like, she really used that sort of, I don't know, cachet or whatever she got to really like go for the weirder, whatever she wanted to do, kind of like route with her career, which is really interesting. And then it's interesting, you know, as you were talking about her early career, a lot of actresses kind of started the way that she did, as you mentioned, but she was able to, I don't know, kind of carve out like a more prestige route for herself. She started working with like Iñárritu and more Oscar friendly directors. What is it that you think maybe she was able to capitalize on that others have not? Because she's been embraced by awards more than other actresses of her generation. I mean, even Easy A, you know, she did get like that surprise Golden Globe nomination for it, which is rare.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if you stack up an interesting actress to kind of if you put her alongside and you look at their individual career trajectories, I think it's really interesting the parallels between her and Brie Larson. And they almost seem to be moving in opposite directions.
Right.
Like Brie Larson kind of comes out doing interesting kind of indie work, you know, and she gets her Oscar. She does this incredible kind of gets her Oscar, and then she kind of moves into the comic book franchise world, and it seemed to be maybe, I don't know, is creatively less fulfilling for her perhaps. Whereas I think Emma Stone kind of got her comic book movies under her belt, and then she's got her Oscar, and as you say, like she's sort of progressed from there, and she's gone. It's almost, I get the impression that the roles she's choosing are very much, she's got nothing to lose now, right? She's very well liked and respected, I think, in the industry. She's got a great track record, and people like Yorgos Lanthimos want to work with her, and she's quite up for doing kind of those more interesting roles. I mean, Poor Things was, I mean, I wrote about it in my column actually, which will be out this week. Like, she pretty much puts that movie on her back and carries it. Like she does, like, and there's a lot of great performances and it's beautiful to look at, but she's walking like a very thin line the whole way through that film. Like that could go horribly wrong at any moment. And you can imagine, like, in other hands, that could be a horrible kind of conflicting mess. And I know for some parts of the audience, it was quite controversial, but I personally felt like, wow, like she threaded the needle there. She nailed that performance. She goes through, like, you know, she's an adult baby effectively at the start of the movie, and like a fully realized, fully rounded adult person by the end, and you barely, like, it just happens and it's kind of magical. Like she kind of charts that arc absolutely beautifully and does it, you know, entertainingly funny. I mean, I'm rhapsodizing now. I wouldn't be surprised if in a couple more years we're sat here talking about Emma Stone's third or fourth Oscar, because I think she's got all to play for.
Yeah, I think, you know, when I watched Poor Things, what was so surprising is, like, and I know people say this all the time, but she just really went for it. And there's a lot of talk about, like, oh, actresses will, you know, forget about vanity to win their Oscar. But I feel like a lot of actresses would probably deliver a more timid performance, but there was just something so bold about all of her choices and so surprising to me. And I agree with you. I do think she's absolutely has the trajectory to win a third and kind of be in that Meryl Streep, Frances McDormand realm. But, you know, one thing I did want to talk about is, in hindsight, to me, I wonder if you agree or disagree, her win for La La Land sort of feels inevitable because, you know, we thought all had the momentum for Best Picture. It wins Best Director. It was very much like the movie of the year, especially in the beginning. Obviously, Moonlight gains momentum, ends up taking it in the end, but that was the year of La La Land. That was the movie that everyone was talking about. And a lot of people now will talk about, Natalie Portman and Jackie and Isabella Pear. But again, to me, it just felt like Emma, she was the belle of the ball of the season. From my perspective, I wonder if you agree or disagree in sort of how you think that win in particular has, maybe that when we know she has sort of this Poor Things performance, like, do you think Oscar voters kind of wish they could go back and give somebody? I'm just curious how you think of that win in the context of her now having this second one.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, 2016, it looked like it was hers from day one, right? It was, and like in the end, I think it was a bigger surprise that La La Land didn't win more than it did in the Oscars.
Right.
And I think some of that is actually a reaction to how inevitable La La Land winning everything felt. Like I think the Academy in the end maybe penalized La La Land for being this awards juggernaut throughout awards season, and it has all the hallmarks of your classic Oscar-winning movie. It's a movie about movies, right? It's this kind of Technicolor musical in this kind of old-fashioned sort of 19th Busby Berkeley style. So it's this real throwback to an earlier era of Hollywood. Everyone gets to sing and dance and look fantastic. So yeah, it kind of felt right. Okay, we're going to look who's going to win the awards. I think actually it's a crime that Ryan Gosling hasn't really talked about enough in that awards category, because I think, as we saw this year, his live performance, that guy is seriously multi-talented. So yeah, I think it's really interesting, as you say, like the difference between those two roles, because on paper, La La Land feels like very much like it's written to win an Oscar. Like it's almost conventional. Like she's almost like, if you could, like it only needs to be a biopic and for it to be more of an Oscar film.
Yeah, I mean, her La La Land performance is very much like the traditional ingenue performance, like, and the archetype of a performance that is awarded, I would say, more regularly than what she did in Poor Things, right? Like it's more Beatty. She has her big like number at the end. She has a big character arc.
Yeah, it's hopelessly optimistic and in love with the movies as well. Like there's no cynicism about it, which is, I think, what distinguishes it from Damien Chazelle's Babylon. Like where it has there are some similarities in the DNA, like his follow-up film, but that's a really cynical film compared to La La Land, which is really like full of hope and optimism, and it's just lovely. So you're right. I think it's a very Oscars friendly performance, and then Poor Things almost feels like, yeah, as you say, like different to that. It feels. I'll be honest, my money was on Lily Gladstone this year. I thought her performance was Oscar worthy for sure. And I thought, but also it felt appropriate. It felt an important Oscar potentially, for Lily Gladstone to win. So I wouldn't say it was a surprise that Emma Stone won this year necessarily. I think it was worthwhile, but when I was doing my Oscar picks, I had Lily Gladstone down. So I think she was a bit more of an outsider this time. And I think it'll be interesting because this is a, second Yorgos Lanthimos film that's taken Best Actress now as well. Like Olivia Colman took the award for The Favourite, which also had Emma Stone in. I find that kind of incredible, right? That Yorgos Lanthimos has now become an accepted Hollywood darling.
Right. Well, and I mean, all the post-Oscar memes were like, when is Amy Adams, call up Yorgos? Like, that's going to be your ticket to the Oscars.
It's wild, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, someone needs to do something about that. Poor old Amy Adams. She deserves her Oscar.
So I want to move on to the next actress on your list, which is, I think we can make some parallels, is of course Meryl Streep. So kind of tell me about your relationship to Meryl in particular, and sort of how you view her.
My relationship with Meryl, well, that feels overly familiar for the grand dame of Hollywood. I mean, she's just the best, isn't she? I was, looking in there, doing some familiarizing myself with her career a bit earlier, and like 17 Best Actress nominations in her career. I mean, 2 wins in the end. 2 wins, I think it's 2 wins, isn't it? For Sophie's Choice and The Iron Lady, which are maybe not the films that you might expect Like if you were to like, go and talk to the average person on the street and say like, pick me your best Meryl Streep performances, I don't think you'd necessarily choose those ones as being the most memorable. I mean, I think she's always been a part of my my cultural memory. Like in terms of
Right.
whenever I go into films, like for as long as there was films, there was Meryl Streep as far as I was concerned. Her longevity is just phenomenal, and I think I first really became fully properly aware of her. I think I knew who she was, but I think I was really fully blown away when the first time I saw Deer Hunter.
Mm.
When I first got really nerdy about films in my mid-teens, I went through like a 70s Hollywood thing, which I think everyone was like a rite of passage for the movie now. And I was got really obsessed with Robert De Niro as you're supposed to, I think. And then happened to, and I saw in Deer Hunter, and I read about her and John Cazale's relationship and how tragic that was. And yeah, she's just, the fact she's still, again, would it be a surprise if she had another couple of Oscars in her? I don't think it would it? At this point, I mean, she's just amazing.
Well, and that's interesting you bring that up, because her Oscar trajectory is really interesting in that, like, she's considered one of the greats, but then when it gets to, like, The Iron Lady, it almost felt like, why doesn't she have a third? And there was, like, this prolonged period of, like, when is she gonna get the third? And so it did kind of feel like The Iron Lady, in a lot of weird ways, was like a makeup Oscar for her, or like, we really like you, here's a third one because you should be in the class of people who have three. You know what I mean? And I agree with
That's
you,
right,
like,
yeah, because she's got
it's
Best Supporting
it's
Actress, hasn't she, as well as 2
right,
Best Actress,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So, and that kind of goes back to what you're saying, this trend of like a lot of times when we look at Best Actress in particular, it doesn't feel like the wins are for their best work. It's sort of like anointing them, this thing of like, we like you, you're one of our, you should be in this pantheon, in this select group.
Yeah.
Rather than like the best work of that year, the best work of your career.
And there's a real trend across all the categories for that, isn't there? I
Mhm.
mean, Scorsese for The Departed is by no means his most exciting work, I wouldn't say, and DiCaprio's Oscar for The Revenant was really the Oscar he should have won for Wolf of Wall Street, but they didn't give it to it. I think you're right. The hit rate, her conversion rate, if you like, for like nominations to wins is staggeringly. Is really low. She deserves maybe more Oscars. If you look down the list, I mean, there's almost like similar to Katharine Hepburn, who we'll also talk about. Like it's almost like Meryl Streep's getting cast in a movie makes it Oscar, gives it Oscar buzz. Meryl Streep's in the movie, therefore we're going to look at this through the lens of an Oscar nomination.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely true. I think there's a lot of films that she elevated to the awards conversation simply because she was in it. And there's not a lot of actors or actresses that we can say that about. I mean, do you think that sort of, I mean, maybe not in the last couple of years, she's taken a bit of a break, but there was like a period there where it seemed like she was just getting, like Florence Foster Jenkins and Into the Woods, like she was almost kind of becoming like the villain of Oscar season for a few years there, because it felt like, well, they're just going to shoehorn in Meryl Streep rather than kind of look for more inspired performance. I mean, would you agree?
That's a good question. Maybe there is. I haven't really thought about it, but there is maybe a trend in some of the roles she's taken in maybe the last 10 years. They're more mannered. They're more exaggerated, perhaps. Like, I mean, that was certainly my memory of Florence Foster Jenkins. I haven't seen it for a while, but it was a very big performance, wasn't it? Like, she seems to kind of do a lot of acting, if maybe not necessarily like lots of brilliant acting. I think it does seem like maybe she's picking bigger roles, more interesting roles, almost pantomime feels a bit unkind, but that's interesting. I hadn't thought about it. There's definitely, she's maybe just having a bit more fun now, picking roles where she can have fun and perform big. Like Julie and Julia had a similar thing, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Just out of curiosity, what did you think of The Iron Lady?
I don't feel particularly strongly about it. I don't hate it as much as other people hate it. I think good for Meryl for having 3. I don't. There are worse performances, I think, for sure. I don't think Meryl is capable of giving a truly bad performance. I don't know if that's an unpopular opinion.
I think that's probably fair. I think it's probably a fair assessment. I'm just interested to ask because obviously I live in England, and she was playing Margaret Thatcher in an incredibly sympathetic portrayal, which is not necessarily a bad thing depending on your politics. But I think that alone made it quite an interesting sort of film, because it was, and obviously a film that felt like it was geared towards an American audience about a political figure. And so as a British person who maybe has some opinions about Margaret Thatcher's legacy, it kind of felt weirdly strange to see her played so sympathetically. Even if that performance was great and she was doing what the script demanded really well, but it makes it quite difficult to evaluate.
But I mean, would you think that film in general has had a very strong legacy? Like, I think it's kind of forgettable. I mean, no one really talks about it. So,
yeah, I think it'll go down in history along with like The Darkest Hour and other kind of like historical biopics of political figures who are unremarkable, really, in the sense that they tick enough of the boxes, to kind of get you the award. So yeah, I think we can all agree that she deserved an Oscar for Devil Wears Prada, right?
Right. I was gonna say
that's a big black spot in her.
Let's pretend that The Devil Wears Prada, that the Iron Lady just has The Devil Wears Prada on it. I think
that's reasonable.
To make myself feel better about what. So there's two things. While we kind of, before we move on, one, I wanted to ask you, because it's interesting you bring up sort of like, I think the British contingent has sort of always had a big influence on the Oscars, and particularly we've seen that grow in recent years. But I mean, even back to like the King's Speech, the Iron Lady, the Queen, like British films always do well. And then, again, with sort of Emma and Poor Things, I would say like maybe the British contingent helped push that over. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, pretty good. I think there's a really interesting, like the British film industry is in some ways it's in really good health. In other ways, a bit like the film industry in general, I think it's very good at the top end, and maybe not so good elsewhere. But a few years ago, the British government made it very, very attractive from a tax point of view to make films and bring productions to the UK. And as a result, there's been an explosion in production in England in particular, and Northern Ireland, actually. So it's very favorable. So as a result, there's been this kind of, so you've got the kind of like business economic conditions that make it really worthwhile to make films in England with English crews and craftspeople. And then there's just something about, specifically through the Oscars lens, the Academy seems to really love period dramas. Like it's just, there's something about the kind of bonnets and corsets that you guys just seem to love. And so I'm quite happy to keep churning them out. We've got plenty of we've got plenty of private school graduate actors who can do a convincing Mr. Darcy, or like who can come turn up and do like a good Austen, or maybe as you say, like a mid-20th century sort of political figure. So yeah, it's from that point of view, you do get quite a lot of interesting kind of stuff, like things more and more at Leavesden and different kind of studios around. We're a small country, but there's a kind of huge concentration of them. Yeah, it's really interesting.
And sort of my last Meryl-esque question that I was thinking about as we were discussing is kind of, and we talked about this with Emma, but I'm curious sort of comparing Meryl with a lot of her contemporaries, particularly like Glenn Close, maybe somebody like Michelle Pfeiffer. I mean, there's, I don't know, Meg Ryan. I mean, there's a lot of different, what do you think it is about Meryl that she was sort of embraced in a way that others have not? And I mean, it says a lot about maybe the awards industry in general, where we can sort of have one prestige actress at a time. Maybe they sort of anointed Meryl as like their chosen one, and then there wasn't room for anyone else. I mean, how do you feel about that? What do you think?
One of the things I was really struck by when I was looking down all the lists of Oscar winners, one of the things that's really notable is, particularly if you're talking about multiple Academy Award winning actors and actresses, I think it's really interesting to look at when they won their Oscars and how far apart. So, Meryl Streep's consistently been nominated for 40, 50 years, like she barely misses a couple of years. Whereas a number of, at various points, like her rivals, if you like, that you've named some of them there, you know, they will have had a period in the 90s where they would have got like a burst of nominations, a lot of buzz. Like Jodie Foster, who's won a couple of Oscars, but she won a couple of Oscars in quite a narrow time frame. Jane Fonda, a couple of Oscars in the 70s. Glenda Jackson in the early 70s, like right the way through. So I think maybe, and I think that's pretty broad. I think she just has an exceptional amount of longevity. She's evolved, I think, as a performer quite. And I think there's something unique about actress as a category, as an acting category, because I think the way that we think of actresses is different to the way we think of male performers. I think we like unfairly, you know, look at actresses through the lens of their sexuality or their appearance. And I don't think that we've always been good, as I think you tend to have young actresses who get a lot of attention and then they just vanish for 20 or 30 years, and then they might get a second life. And you can see that when you'll see that when we talk about Katharine Hepburn, you know. And so I think there's something about maybe like Hollywood. Meryl Streep, just like her longevity, the fact she continued to work for such a long period of time, meant that when the industry's attitude maybe softened her a little bit, and she wasn't being looked at as an ingenue, she wasn't being looked at as a, you know, as. She also never really took a lot of those big mainstream. She never did the big blockbuster type roles, did she? As far as I can remember, she never really did like what we would now call a franchise or IP kind of style movie. She always has done dramas and interesting comedies as well. But yeah.
Well, even when she went down the comedy route, it always still felt, I don't want to say prestige-y, but it didn't feel like just your like a cash grab. It always felt like maybe there was like a reason, or, you know, even like Mamma Mia, like it was a beloved thing that would, you know.
She's really embraced the kitsch in the last sort of 20 years, hasn't she?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So this kind of brings me to like the Sally Field, like they like me, they really like me thing. And it is true that most actresses in particular, when they have the multiple wins, they happen in a short period. And it feels like when the Oscars embrace you, they're sort of like, you know, this window of time. And so Hilary Swank is the next, is it Swank? I feel like Swank, I always say it wrong. It's Swank, yeah. But she wins her first Oscar for Boys Don't Cry. It was at 99, probably the 2000 Oscar, and then she wins again for $1 Million Baby in 2004. So like that, again, a very short period of time. And then, you know, she hasn't been back to the Oscar race. So I think just her career trajectory is so fascinating, and I wanted to dig into her a little bit.
Yeah, I was excited when you suggested Hilary Swank, actually, because until last night, I'd never actually seen Boys Don't Cry. Never, and I'm going to be honest, that is not necessarily a great Saturday night movie. But it was really, it was extraordinary. I mean, and I sort of look back through her credits, and there wasn't much before that in her, you know, in her filmography. So I think she kind of, as far as I can recall, like, comes to the public consciousness in this incredible performance. And I think in terms of that 99 Oscar race, I mean, bearing in mind that we're now talking about 1999, 25 years later, as being the great the great year in the history of film. Like what, you know, like all of these incredible films that came out in that year. And within that Oscar race, it was open and shut. Hilary Swank had Best Actress sewn up. You know, like there wasn't any debate about it. Like there wasn't a race. They closed the odds on it. The bookmakers closed the odds on it like months before, because it was just nailed down. It was incredible, you know. And even thinking back, you know, 24 hours since I watched the film, I'm still like, I struggle to like assign Hilary Swank that like she/her pronouns, because she so beautifully embodied the role of Brandon in that film, that I see her as a young man struggling with her sort of gender identity. Like that's how I now can perceive her. And then, as you say, like 5 years later, she pops up with $1 Million Baby, and very, in some ways, a more conventional Oscar kind of movie, right? It's a boxing movie. We love a boxing movie. It's Clint Eastwood. I mean, Clint Eastwood's kind of, particularly at that time, like Oscars royalty, Hollywood royalty. But but it's quite, well, forgive the pun, but quite a punchy performance. It's a punchy film. It's unconventional in a lot of ways. But then, yeah, you were right. As soon as you mentioned it, I was like, when was the last time I saw Hilary Swank do it? Like, maybe I remember Logan Lucky. She was in, like, but that's it. Like, what happened?
Mhm.
Like, as far as her IMDb goes, she's been working consistently, still every year doing stuff, making a living. But it's a double Academy Award winner. Why is she? What happened? Where'd it go? Yeah, it's fascinating. I don't know if maybe her life, I don't know, personal life changed or something. Like her lifestyle, whatever. She just didn't want to be doing some of those big. Yeah, why is she not working with Scorsese, and why is she not working with Villeneuve and
And she
Lanthimos?
did
Why is she not?
a Nolan film early on too, Insomnia. Yeah, I don't know. It's really interesting,
Oh,
and
yeah,
it
of
kind of
course.
goes back to like with the Oscars. It feels like they do sort of have two things. You're either the ingenue that they want to award early on and kind of anoint you, or you're like the elderly statesman that they're like, okay, here's your career achievement. And it's kind of I wonder if, do you think maybe like those Oscars early-ish on in her career like maybe did more harm than good? Like maybe the trajectory of her career would be different if she hadn't have won.
Yeah,
Is
I
it
think there's. Yeah, I think maybe. I think there's a touch of Jodie Foster syndrome. I think there maybe Jodie Foster obviously kind of branched out into like production and producing and directing a bit more, and still works pretty steadily as an actress. But yeah, like it must have been. I mean, she was pretty young with $1 Million Baby as well. That must be a lot. That must be a lot to take on, and a huge. And her biggest, maybe one of her bigger contributions to pop culture is that kind of Office scene. That episode of the Office. I couldn't
yeah.
stop thinking about that when you mentioned it. Is she hot?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, she's fascinating. It's a fascinating case study.
Yeah.
Of Oscar winners. I mean, actually, not dissimilar to an Oscar winner from the early 70s, Glenda Jackson, who won 2 Oscars in very quick succession and then left acting to go into politics in the UK. Like, it's really, it's interesting, like how many exit stage left and just kind of, remove themselves. Maybe there's a second act for Hilary Swank. I'd like to think that we haven't seen the last of her.
Well, I mean, so next on your list is Katharine Hepburn, which like is the only actress or only person to have 4 Oscars, and has that sort of longevity that a lot of people don't have. So sort of talk me through your thoughts on her and why she is a sort of as iconic as she is, and again, what makes her what made her be able to do that when so many others, as you say, have this sort of burst and then fade away rather quickly.
Yeah, and actually, if you're talking about longevity, I mean, I think two of the actresses we've already talked about, you can kind of, it's really interesting to look at Katharine Hepburn's career almost through the lens there. She's got Meryl Streep's longevity. I mean, so her first Oscar win was in 1934, with her last in 1981. So there's like a 48 year gap between those 2 wins, which is wild, right? So she's, I mean, for the film history buffs out there, and for those of you maybe less familiar, I think one of the things that, it was only really when I got more interested in film history that I went back and watched a lot of these films, because they're not something that come up kind of day to day in our day-to-day discussion too often. But I think my first exposure to her was maybe Cate Blanchett's portrayal of her in The Aviator, and I was kind of got me curious, and I kind of wanted to go back and see some of it, some of the stuff. In a lot of ways, her screen persona reminds me a little bit of Emma Stone's in some ways. Very much, if you imagine Emma Stone like the 1930s and 40s, she's quite unusual for Hollywood at that time. She's not the ingenue. She's not a kind of Gloria Graham or a Marilyn Monroe type figure. She's not conventionally sexy. She's almost androgynous in her appearance at times, but she's witty and dry and clever, and she goes toe to toe with Cary Grant and Jimmy Stewart and some of those great performers of that time. Like, she never took a backward step, and that was in her private life as well as her on-screen performances. So her Oscars were Morning Glory in 1934. I'm referring to notes because there's a lot to keep track of. Guess Who's Coming to Dinner in 1968, which I went back and watched again the other night in preparation for this, because it's been ages since I'd seen it. Hasn't aged super well, maybe. Like, it's kind of a problematic film in a lot of ways, but fascinating. So, but there's a 34-year gap between her first and her second Oscar, which again tells you that story, right? The same thing, the young, exciting up-and-comer who gets this kind of burst of attention, who then maybe gets forgotten for a while and then gets this second act. And I think that was very much Katharine Hepburn's experience, because she won for Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and then the following year followed up with a second Oscar the next year. So she won back-to-back Oscars in 68 and 69 for The Lion in Winter. And then her final Oscar came in 1981 with On Golden Pond. That was very much a Lifetime Achievement Oscar. Like, that was very much the kind of, you've been around for so long and we love you and we'll celebrate your career with this Oscar. Guess Who's Coming to Dinner was very much like this comeback. And in that performance, she's playing the mother. Like, that's her role, is like to give away her daughter to this, to give her consent to this, to the young generation moving on, and to approve their marriage. And obviously that film was, for those who aren't familiar, it was Spencer Tracy's last film as well, and so they were a long time couple in real life, and so they were played a married couple in the film. Spencer Tracy then subsequently died and was nominated posthumously for Best Supporting Actor, I think, for his role in that film. And then in the end, it was Katharine Hepburn who was the only one who actually won anything. So yeah, she very much became emblematic of, she's unusual in that she was a rare case of an actor who straddled more like that, who survived the golden era. There's the golden age of Hollywood. Very few actors made it through that unscathed. The fact that Katharine Hepburn was still winning Oscars into the 80s is kind of amazing.
So when I saw her on your list, sort of the big question that I had is, like, if we put Katharine Hepburn into like our modern era of cinema, does she still win for? Is she still considered one of the greats? Like, how do you think she stacks up, or was she just very much like a product of her time?
I think her persona was very much a product. Her screen persona was very much a product of its time. I don't think, as a film-going public, we have as much sort of patience for that very well-to-do, kind of very upper crust, sort of well-heeled sort of performer. Like, I think that would alienate modern audiences, frankly. I think in places. I think but I think you would find roles for her. Like, she was, I think, who knows what the future of the romantic comedy has in store, but she really excelled in some of those early screwball comedies and those romantic comedies. And watching her in these wacky kind of Bringing Up Baby and the one I'm thinking of with the Newsroom with Cary Grant, I can't remember its name. They're amazing. Like, she's just amazing, and she does dialogue. She's rat-a-tat. Like, there'd be no Julia Roberts or Jennifer Aniston without Katharine Hepburn, but she could do the heavy stuff too. Like, she could do Meryl Streep kind of big Oscar prestige roles, as well as she could do the light comedy. And there's not too many performers that are versatile. And I think, so I'd like to imagine there's a world where Katharine Hepburn today gets to have the career that she does. I think whether or not that person wins 4 Oscars today, I think is unusual, because I think Meryl Streep's got 3, and I think Frances McDormand is who I think is maybe kind of maybe an anomaly getting 3, because I think it's harder to win multiple Oscars now. I think it's those early days. Like, if you look back at the 20s and 30s in Hollywood, like, the Oscars was really new. Nobody really knew what we were doing yet. Like, the industry was much smaller pool of people who got to choose. So it was much more of a popularity contest than it is now, maybe. So I think the game has changed significantly.
They're more hesitant now, I think, to give out the multiple, because I think that's kind of my next question is like, do you think there's someone now, actor or actress, who could win 4? Because to me, it's like, if we haven't given Daniel Day-Lewis 4 and he's done for all of that, or Jack Nicholson, right? I mean, like, if those people haven't gotten to 4, like, I don't know if anyone will.
Yeah, who knows? I mean,
Yeah.
Who knows? DiCaprio's only got 1. I think it's interesting to try it. I think it's fun to maybe look at the crop of, I've never felt older than when I've said this, but the crop of young actors who are kind of making their way at the moment. So maybe we'll be talking about, Zendaya's 4th, 5th Oscar in 10 years time.
10 years, maybe we'll be in our 80s and 90s
but
recording.
I think I wouldn't be surprised. I think she's got something special. I think she could.
Okay, I'm gonna need you to come back, and we'll do a whole episode on who we think like the next generation of Oscar winners is.
Okay, that'd be fun.
Yeah, but
just
okay.
The cast
so speaking
of Euphoria,
Catherine,
right?
Yeah, right, exactly. Probably, honestly, those Euphoria girlies are doing very well. But it's interesting. So the next person on our list is Frances McDormand, and she, I would argue, is the closest we have to Katharine Hepburn, right? I mean, she's not sort of. And I love her. I don't mean this in any disrespect, but she's not movie star polished. She has she's like very private. She's not in the tabloids. She's, her roles are very much like stripped. I don't know if I've ever seen Frances McDormand do like kind of a she's always sort of playing like regular people that the audience can relate to. So she is, she definitely is, I would say, like the closest comparison to Katharine Hepburn for me.
Yeah, she's quite different to Katharine. She's more of an everyman, I would say. And Katharine Hepburn's kind of roles always kind of gave you the impression she was like the smartest person in the room. Whereas I think with Frances McDormand, you've got an incredibly grounded, very salt of the earth. She's always like, particularly if you look at the roles that she's won her 3 Oscars for. So there's nothing more like her at Fargo. I mean, of the 3, actually, Fargo's probably the only one that I maybe liked as a film. I can see why she would win the other awards for the other 2, but I didn't particularly love No Man's Land, and if I'm honest, I didn't get on that well with 3 Billboards. But I loved her in Fargo. I thought that's one of my favorite films, full stop. And that's the heart of that film, her performance as Marge Gunderson. I would also say as well, Frances McDormand has my favorite movie mum role as well. In Almost Famous is Almost Famous is my guilty pleasure movie. I'd maybe watch it like 4 or 5 times a year. In spite of the fact I know it's kind of got its flaws, I still just love it in spite of its flaws, and she's great in that. I do love her in that.
Well, one of the criticisms of her multiple Oscar wins is that she's sort of maybe won for similar performances. Like maybe her Oscar wins don't necessarily display much of a range. Would you agree or disagree?
I think that's probably a fair criticism. I think certainly for the 2 most recent wins, I think that's probably, I think so, like 3 Billboards and No Man's Land. I think it probably is a fair criticism. Maybe not of her, but of the Academy. I think this is what saying at the top about what wins the Oscars isn't necessarily the best performance, but it tells us something important about how the Academy sees itself, how Hollywood perceives itself, and what it values for its performances. And what it wants from its actors. So the fact that within sort of 5 years she's won 2 Oscars for potentially quite similar roles, she's playing those kind of working class mums who have maybe had some go through a traumatic situation and having to carry a lot of emotional weight and do a lot of emotional heavy lifting. She does that incredibly well. Like there's probably nobody who can do that better than Frances McDormand. That kind of dignified emotional weight, like she even in like 3 Billboards, where maybe there's not always, it kind of spills out in her performance a little bit emotionally. It's not restrained, but So she's very relatable. I think, yeah, I can see why she would win a lot of awards. It's hard to begrudge her Oscars, isn't it? Like, even if she's not doing lots of like variety.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when Nomadland came along and everyone had, was predicting her, I was like, there's no way. I was like, they just gave her a second one. They're not going to give her a third. As much as I love her, did not picture her as like a 3-time Academy Award. I just didn't think she was in that group. Like, I was sort of surprised that she had enough esteem in the industry. Again, I'm not trying to knock her, but to me, it's like Meryl makes sense, Day-Lewis makes sense. Even like that when it was like Denzel versus Casey Affleck, I was like, of course Denzel. I fully agree. Like, he at some point is gonna win a third, but it just didn't seem like she was there, and so I was really like kind of shocked by that. And I think you're completely right. I hadn't thought about it before, but I think awarding her for those performances kind of gives Hollywood a chance to say, look, we're just like you, kind of like we're not on this sort of shiny hill. We're sort of salt of the earth. And then, of course, I mean, those films were such locks for Best Picture. So sort of having its leading lady sort of come along for the ride is.
Do you think, because she's there's a bit of, maybe, do you think there's maybe a bit of Hollywood, sort of internal Hollywood politics that goes on there a little bit? She's very popular, like, around the circuit. I know she's, as you say, quite private. She's not showbiz about it, but her and Ethan Cohen, she's married to Ethan Cohen. It's Ethan Cohen, isn't it? Not Joel. It's Ethan she's married to.
No, she's married to Joel.
Joel, right? Okay, sorry, Ron Cohen.
No, you're good.
So she's married to Joel Cohen. So they're, he's obviously an incredibly well-respected filmmaker in his own right. Do you think that has something to do with it? Maybe?
Oh, absolutely. I think, she's part of like Hollywood royalty, and even something like, Women Talking. She was a big producer on that. Got the producing Oscar nomination. So, and she doesn't campaign in a traditional sense, but I think behind the scenes she sort of harnesses a lot of power. But it makes me think, because after Fargo, there was a period in her career where she was doing a lot of, maybe by choice or circumstance or whatever, she was doing a lot of smaller roles, and she didn't really have very many showcases. So I don't know if maybe she was like building her coalition, so to speak. Her trajectory has also been really interesting to me, because now you would argue that now she's sort of more powerful than she's ever been, which to the point of our discussion,
she's sort of the quintessential Hollywood mum, isn't she? Like all of those 3 roles she's playing. I know she's pregnant in Fargo, but she's playing a mum or an expectant mum. She's everyone. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe all those. Everyone looks at her as Hollywood's mum, Hollywood's favorite mum. I don't know. Maybe I'm projecting there.
Yeah. No, but, and I mean, it's interesting. She uses sort of her Nomadland Oscar speech to sort of advocate for like more inclusivity, and she's sort of become like a big power player in sort of shaping the industry, which is really interesting. And it's probably added to the narrative of her winning a third, is like, because like she was I think she won for producing Nomadland as well. So that probably had a lot to do with it.
Yeah, that was a curious one. Maybe it's because I didn't fall in love with it. Maybe I need to go back and give it another try. Maybe maybe it didn't connect with me the first time when I saw it, particularly. But maybe it's because I didn't have the same. Maybe being in the UK, like it meant something different to me. Like there was a gap between. Yeah, I don't know. That was interesting. I might have to go watch it again.
That's interesting. I think both 3 Billboards and Nomadland feel a little bit more like quintessentially American. Like they kind of take place in Middle America. And I think you're right. I mean, even when we think of like great performances, like you're more likely to mention Fargo than you are 3 Billboards or Nomadland. I don't know if I don't think they've aged particularly. You know what I mean? Like we don't really.
And Nomadland was what, like 2 years ago,
right? But I mean, I kind of forgot about. I mean, before we were getting ready to do this, it's not something that, again, sort of stands out as like an all-time great performance the way that Fargo does.
Yeah, I think that'll be the one, that they'll remember her for. Yeah.
So let's talk about Vivian Lee. A great place to end our discussion, but she's such a, I mean, talk about like the ingenue, right? And I mean, like,
Yeah.
but the ingenue that was able to capture awards attention, which again, as I mentioned, so many are not. And so I'm always fascinated by, again, who they decide to anoint versus who they say, no, stay in your little, just be pretty and play those. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. And in so many ways, Vivian Lee is almost like such an extreme example of actually almost literally being anointed. Like, so she won her first Oscar for Gone with the Wind. And, there'd been the whole search for Scarlett O'Hara thing, this nationwide talent search to find this woman who would play this role. And of course, right, classic Hollywood studio in the late 30s? Yeah, 1939, yeah, Gone with the Wind. They'd lined her up behind the scenes and they'd literally like been picked, like David O. Selznick, the producer, like handpicked her, but then went through this entire like performance, this PR exercise to cast this role. So, but even almost from then, it was almost set up for whoever got this role was going to be a star and was probably going to then go and would probably go on to win the Oscar, because that's what the studio demanded. It won everything and it won the big five. She is very much, as you say, like the classic ingenue in that role, like the kind of Southern belle, very like, and it's almost like the quintessential classic kind of golden age Hollywood movie in so many ways, troubling politics included, I would say. But she more than holds her own, I think, in that performance and she's up against Clark Gable, who was probably at the height of his powers at that time, the mayor of Hollywood, very much like the most established male star. And she brings a lot to that performance. That's a big, full-throated, committed performance. The film really hinges on her, and it's it's kind of remarkable. And obviously, she Hollywood royalty, married to Laurence Olivier, and kind of had quite a trouble. And again, in some ways, it was a redemption arc for her, because she wins in 1939, and then it's not till the 50s. When was, I got it written down, when did she win? Yeah, Streetcar Named Desire was 51, so 12 years between those two Oscars. And she got a reputation for being difficult to work with, and maybe didn't get all the roles that she would have liked, I think, during that period. And so she gets this big redemption at the end, and she comes back and really, again, like straddles those two eras of Hollywood. You've got this, she's really bookending it, maybe in a way that like Katharine Hepburn kind of straddles these like three different like glorious periods of Hollywood history. These three are kind of like really clearly defined periods, whereas Vivian Lee's maybe coming in towards the end of the golden age and kind of ushers in this new generation of method actors when she kind of like wins for playing opposite Marlon Brando in Streetcar. So yeah, I mean, just those two performances alone, I mean, worthwhile, each of them, for winning an Oscar.
Right. Well, that's what I was going to say, is how many actors can you think of where you look at both of their Oscar wins and go, those are absolutely iconic performances that if those races were held today, they'd probably win again. I mean, it's pretty incredible.
And to pick up on the point you were making earlier, like rare perhaps in the case of like, those are inarguably the best performances of her career. Like those are the most like the best films that she made. Like, and therefore, and it's really unusual. There isn't like oh, really? She won an Oscar for that one? Like, no, okay, yeah, got it. Gone with the Wind. Cool, got it. Yeah, fair enough. Hard to argue with that. Yeah, and in so many ways, there's sort of interesting parallels between those two roles. Like, they're very in different settings and they're very different stories. But they're not particularly, like, they're very much, they're quite similar roles, like in their sort of the way they set up their gender politics, the way they set up against their kind of male counterparts.
Well, I think what stands out to me is like just the raw charisma. I mean, even like Gone with the Wind, I think if anyone else, she's such a bratty character, but there's something about Vivian Lee where it's like you love her, and I feel like if anyone else would have done it, I can't imagine. I really can't imagine it. And same thing with Street. I mean, sort of those scenes with Marlon Brando and the back and forth. There's so much power and like grit and like sex appeal. It's just the perfect marriage, like both of those performances.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, just can you just imagine just having Vivian Lee stood in front of you shouting at you? I mean, that's that. I mean, that'd be pretty just it's incredibly sexy, isn't it? Like, there's just something, as you say, about the way she does that. And yeah, she's probably unusual, actually, of the actresses that we've spoken about, because I don't actually necessarily. I think if you take the body of work over the whole of her career, I don't necessarily think that she's the most talented actress that we've talked about, like in this episode. I think she's not the most versatile. She doesn't have the most longevity, but what she is perfectly suited to play those two roles, and she plays those two roles like to perfection.
Interesting. All right. Well, is there anything about any of our actresses, or just as we wrap? I do have a couple more questions before I let you go, but in terms of our crop of actresses today, do you think we covered it all?
I think of those five, yeah, we've talked quite a lot. I mean, there's loads more you could talk about. They're not the only actors with multiples, but yeah, they're just a selection. But yeah, that was fun.
But I think they do kind of encapsulate the conversation around multiple wins and how does that happen. I guess that was kind of my ending question for you, is like, where do you think the best actress race is going in general? Because what I think is really interesting is, for a long time, kind of the best actress race was maybe a little bit of an afterthought, or again, with the politics of Hollywood, it unfortunately is the case that best actor is more typically tied with best picture. Those are the roles that we maybe think of meatier, but then I think of, like, particularly maybe the last decade or so, best actress is the most interesting race, the most stacked category, the race that is the nail biter of the evening. Is that, I mean, part of it is hopefully the politics of Hollywood are changing, but it's also, I don't know, a tendency to award maybe older actresses or people that are doing more interesting work. Like, where are we going with this?
Yeah, I think there's reason to be excited. I think this year was really. I think, and if you take best supporting actress as well, then you kind of you do the you put those two together. I think that this year was a really good. If this year is any sign of what we can expect in the future, I think we can be optimistic. I think there were I think any one of three of the nominated actresses for best actress could have justifiably taken home the award this year. I'd have, Lily Gladstone, Sandra Hüller, or Emma Stone. I wouldn't have argued with any of them.
I would put Carey Mulligan in there too.
Yeah, I think Carey Mulligan was the best thing about Maestro. But I think what's most exciting about it is there's been a horrible tendency, and I think this unfairly kind of lines up with maybe Emily Blunt's experience this year, is like that role of wife of the genius man.
Yeah, the long-suffering wife.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing more interesting roles. I think there's fewer of those. I think we're talking about that more. I think we're talking about the fact that there's more interesting roles for actresses, for female performers in Hollywood. So I think they're leading more films rather than which is good, exciting, and I think one of the more interesting best actress awards, like for Emma Stone, Poor Things, this year. So I think that's positive. I think that shouldn't be complacent about that. I think it's exciting to see that there's more female filmmakers getting more attention, and I think that cascades, that has like a knock-on effect to the acting categories. I think this year, I think Margot Robbie would be justifiably disappointed to have not been nominated for Barbie this year. I was astonished that she didn't get a nomination for that. I think Natalie Portman should have been nominated for this year, and she wasn't, and that would, for a second Oscar potentially. So I'm excited to see where it goes. I think we've got a crop of exciting talent, of young that's coming through. So yeah.
So as we wrap, is there anything that you have been working on that you would like to plug, and any movies that you've seen recently that that you want to nerd out with me for a bit that you think may be awardsy or not, just something you watch for fun?
So yeah, a couple of film recs from this weekend that I watched that I've really enjoyed. There's a film I've just reviewed for In Session Film actually, called In Flames, that's out on the 8th, so that's tomorrow as we record, which was the Pakistan entry for the international film category at the Academy Awards. It was the first Pakistani film to be entered into Directors Fortnight at Cannes this year.
Oh, wow.
And it's a really well made, really slick, really elegant psychological thriller, and I think it's the sort of movie that you won't get a wide release internationally, and if you can seek it out, it's really worth seeking out, because I thought it was really good. And I caught up with All of Us Strangers last night have you seen that? And I haven't really, I just haven't recovered yet. I mean, I just want to give Paul Mescal a big hug, because I've only just got over watching him in After Sun, to be honest. But that was what a movie. That was devastating.
I know it's not all about the Oscars, but Andrew Scott not getting, I mean, the movie not getting Oscar in general, but Andrew Scott,
how did that not get anything? What a crime.
One of the worst snubs in the history of the Oscars. I will stand by that. Ask me in 10 years, I will still say that. I mean, it's just a remarkable film. Yeah, highly recommend. I think it's on Hulu, right? It's streaming on Hulu.
Yeah, I mean, yes. I think it's slightly different over here in the UK, so I think it would be Hulu over there.
Hulu
on Disney,
in the States.
Disney Plus, but on the
highly recommend. What I wanted to plug is a book by Stephen Talbert called Best Actress. Andy, have you read this book?
No, I haven't, but I will. I'll rectify that.
Yeah, the history of Best Actress, diving into all the wins, the movies, and it's a fascinating look and sort of how the race has shaped over the years. So I highly recommend it. Best Actress, and it has Sophia Loren on the cover. It's just a gorgeous book to add to your collection. So if you want to continue to nerd out about Best Actress, I highly recommend that book. And I'm currently trying to get ready for Emmy seasons. I've been catching up on a lot of TV. So catch us on InSessionFilm.com. Please rate and review Chasing the Gold anywhere that you listen to your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, and we're on YouTube as well. Let us know what other episodes you'd like to hear from us. I will definitely have Andy back for editing and lots of other Best Actress conversations. But thank you, Andy, so much for nerding out with me. It was a blast.
Always a treat to talk about movies.
Yeah. And we'll catch you guys next time. Thanks.